Welcome back to Off the Pitch, the podcast where we chat with individuals working within and shaping the game of soccer from off the pitch. Today's guest is Jeremy Alumbaugh. Jeremy currently serves as a president of US Soccer's second division, USL Championship. Among a whole host of topics, Jeremy shares with us what it's like to run a league that spans across the entire nation, and also how that differed to his previous role, which is being the CEO of a club in the third division. Jeremy also gives us his take on the magic of the Open Cup, his thoughts on what promotion and relegation would do for the US soccer pyramid, and also shares with us what his vision is for the sport as it looks to continue to grow here in America. There is a lot to unpack in this episode with Jeremy, who is truly one of the sharpest minds in the industry. And so with that being said, let's get into the episode. All right. So Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your time. We know you're only about a year into your new role, so we're sure it's very busy. We're in the season now, so we'll try and make this nice and quick for you. But before we get into things, we obviously know a bit about your background now and who you are. But for anyone who's listening who doesn't know who you are, would you mind just giving a quick run through of who Jeremy is and kind of what your career has looked like so far?
Yeah, you're as old as I am. I don't know how quick you can do it, but I'll try to move through it pretty quickly. I think for me, it all starts where I grew up. So I grew up in and I'm not going to go all the way back, but I grew up in a very small town in northern Illinois called Hinckley. And the unique thing about Hinckley is soccer was the sport in the town. We had no American football. I don't even know if the high school had a baseball team. Now I played Little League and played basketball and all that, but soccer was it. The homecoming parade in the fall was centered around the soccer team. Now it didn't hurt that the soccer team was very good. Had gone to state as a very small school, this small little farming community, but somehow the small farming community always ended up having some really good foreign exchange students from Scandinavia that just happened to land there and help the team a little bit. But that's how I fell in love with this sport. And from there just kind of grew, did all the stuff playing, club stuff, ODP back in the day, high school. Moved to Champaign, Illinois, and I saw the other side where soccer was not the driving sport in the community. And actually, I think I was in sixth grade, maybe seventh. I was in middle school when a bunch of parents that had kids involved in the club there in town committed to fund the first 2 or 3 years of the high school programs. So I saw the passion of what a community can do when they care about something, and I saw how a sport can evolve in a community. So ended up there, go to school in Wisconsin, Oshkosh, have a great college experience up there on and off the field. Division III Final Four in 1994. Kind of got the coaching bug. Went into coaching, was all set to go to Illinois State University to be a graduate assistant, and they cut the program because of Title IX. So my future, my world was kind of turned upside down, or at least I thought it was. I had good support, good people around me, and quickly found an opportunity at what's now Missouri State University, Division I program in Springfield, Missouri. So I quickly pivoted, went there for grad school, be a graduate assistant. We made the NCAA tournament for the first 2 times in program history in 97 and 99. Had an undefeated regular season in 99, losing in the first round of the NCAA tournament. And along the way, kind of picked up bits and pieces on the business side, at the college level. Did some club coaching there in Springfield and just fell in love with being involved in soccer day to day. The college coaching is great from August through November. And then the rest of the year is okay, in my opinion. Recruiting, fundraising, and the game has changed a lot at the college level. But when I was coaching at the club level, whether I was in the office doing admin stuff or business stuff or coaching, I always was coaching every night. And at the college level, you didn't get to coach every day. And so that interaction with players. So I had the opportunity to go to Chicago, work for what was the #1 youth club in the country at the time, Chicago Magic. Had an unbelievable experience there, working with great talent, winning national championships, but more importantly, really, really got introduced to the business side of soccer, not only at the youth level, but also in the amateur, pre-pro, doing some things. What was the PDL at the time with the Chicago Fire Reserves, now League Two. From there, go back to Springfield, Missouri. A youth club that I left had kind of merged with two other youth clubs, and they were a mess from like a cultural standpoint. The girls' side only wanted to deal with the girls' side. One of the other clubs that came in kind of wanted to keep their team separate. And then, so I came in and, tried to fix that and, really kind of elevate it again. From there, I go to St. Louis to get a chance to coach in the development academy with St. Louis Scott Gallagher. Did that for 5 years, and then St. Louis Scott Gallagher purchased a USL club and became St. Louis FC, and switched over to the pro side to be the vice president, general manager, and then then shifted to Chattanooga for a whole nother experience, which we can get into as well. But had the opportunity to really go be the person in the club, in terms of become the managing director and eventually CEO. And then I get a phone call asking me if I ever thought about working in the league office. And I quickly said no. And Jake Edwards at the time was the USL president. Said, wow, that was a quick response. And I said, yeah, I just think I enjoy the club side too much. And then we talked for about 5 minutes. And he said, look, consider it. Here's why we think you would be good. Here's why we think you would enjoy it. And here I am, like you said, almost a little over a year into it. So try to be as quick as I could. That's what happens when you go past the being 50 years old. You got a lot of history to talk about, but that's kind of my path. And, been a lot of ups and downs throughout it, but would not change a single place that I've been for all the experiences that I had.
Nice. Sounds like you've had your finger in a lot of different pies, in the last 20 years or so. One thing that I'd love to ask about is, it sounds like you picked up a bit of kind of business sense and know-how when it comes to maybe managing budgets and fundraising at the college level and a bit of club. But it feels like a jump to kind of that GM role at St. Louis is kind of, you're here in terms of budgeting and then bang, whole team. What were some of those biggest early kind of learning hurdles that were maybe trial and error learning, that unknown unknowns that you came across in the early days at St. Louis?
Yeah, I think it was a big jump, but I think because of where I had been. So when I was in Springfield before going to St. Louis and coaching the development academy, I was running the day-to-day of the club as well as coaching. So I really got a good idea, of some of the budgeting pieces, cash flow, when's money coming in, when's money coming out. And then, a little bit of that in St. Louis as well. But St. Louis, the first 5 years really prepared me for that jump. I was on the management team, eventually the executive team. And St. Louis Scott Gallagher was and is, a massive youth organization that has a lot of different pieces to it. They own and operate facilities. They run massive youth tournaments. They have a tremendous foundation that provides through the Living Legacy Foundation, a ton of scholarships for players. So, and then they operate the soccer park, WWT Soccer Park, which has a bar and grill and a shop in it. So I really got a lot of those 5 years building up to it. That being said, it was still a bit of a shock to the system. But it comes down to people. And Patrick Barry was the president. Andy Cruz was the vice president of finance. And they just kind of, brought me along, never made me feel like an idiot, when I was asking the difference between a pro forma and a budget and, just everything else that goes into things. They always, brought me along and, kind of related back to my experiences previously to allow me to make those steps. But it was a big jump for a youth club that was very successful to now dive into this professional area. And we learned some things. The league also changed a lot. So when we started the conversation of coming in 2014 to the first year in 2015, and then quickly 2016, things just changed. The dynamics of the type of players that were coming in, the type of ownership groups that were coming in. The league took a massive step forward. So we learned a lot of lessons. I personally learned a lot of lessons there, but really proud of how things, went there. And, it just, the experience has kind of prepared me for it, but then just being surrounded with the right people. And that's been a commonality everywhere I've been, is just being around the right people.
Yeah. And that's something that we've picked up on from a lot of the guests so far. That are running clubs or high up in C-suite, is that building the right culture in the organization. And we speak to people about kind of the difference of like a culture of an actual team versus the culture of a front office, and everyone kind of needs to have that hunger that you see in kind of where you had as a player. So across all the different organizations that you've been at, and of course now in recent years actually running organizations, what is that culture that you have tried to build everywhere that you have been?
Man, put me on the spot on that one. I think, the culture that I had as a coach, I think has prepared me for being a leader within a sports organization or a club. So when I was coaching, obviously there's a first 11, right? And everybody's really important in that first 11 that goes out and starts the match. But how you end a half when you can sub on at half, or how you end the game with what you sub in. Sometimes you're trying to kill a game off that you're winning. Sometimes you're trying to, inject energy into the club to try to find that goal to tie it. And then maybe you're happy with the tie, or maybe you're underperforming. Maybe your first 11's underperforming. So I think the whole basis of, my coaching was really to develop a team that understood their roles, accepted their roles, but also bought into the overall organization of the team, right? The overall how we behave, how we act, how we treat each other. We can tackle each other hard in a training session. We can, almost come to fisticuffs in a training session, but it's always out of respect. And then we go into the matches, and a lot of times the matches were easier than training. I picked it up in Chicago. The what we were doing at the time in Chicago was huge. So, and just in terms of just the mentality and the environment that was created. So now you go to the front office side and you try to create that same culture, right? The ticketing person that is selling groups should feel just as important as a person selling corporate partnerships and seven-figure deals for naming rights. The intern that gives up their summer to live in an Airbnb, or we had an intern in Chattanooga that lived in an RV, found a supporter who had an RV laying around, and this kid lived in it. And he should feel just as important as my vice president of corporate partnerships, right? So getting that teamwork and that buy-in, that everything we do every day is going to matter. And if we do our work ahead of time and we put in that prep work and we do all the research and we make sure that we have good content going out and we make sure that we have good ticketing plans, good pitch decks when we go talk to partners and build relationships. If we do all that, then the selling and performing on game day should be easier than all the prep work we did. So if the game is the same as a game, when you're coaching, going in that game, there's always things you have to be wary of, like does a ticket scanner go down? Does somebody not show up, or that's supposed to work that day, or whatever. You always have to pivot and adjust, but you should be so prepared that going in the game is pretty smooth. And that happens quite often. I think it happens a ton with our clubs too in USL, where all the lead up is the heavy stuff and the game day is the enjoyable part. You still have to execute it. So teamwork, relationships, getting buy-in, that's the culture that I've been around. I also think it's important that no task is underneath anybody. As the CEO, I would go out and move field boards. I remember the first pro game in St. Louis, I unclogged a toilet because the maintenance guy was busy doing something else, right? And here is the GM of a pro team going in and unclogging a toilet. I don't even do that at home, right? My wife handles all those type of things at the house, and here I am in a stadium doing that. But I think that sets a tone with everybody else in the organization. I think that's how you build culture.
Awesome. And then in terms of when you're in the process of building the culture, or you've got it built, and then you're hiring new employees to come into this culture, what kind of characteristics, actual technical experience, all of that aside, what kind of characteristics about a person are you looking for, or you were looking for at the club level to come into that culture and kind of fit into this jigsaw puzzle?
Yeah, some of the best people that I've ever hired had zero experience within sports, but it was about that fit, right? Did they understand the mission statement of the club, what the club stood for, what the club was going to try to do, how we treated each other? And then the other big thing was, did they have a growth mindset? Are they willing to grow and willing to learn? One of the best hires I ever made was in Chattanooga, because my wife came home from a networking event and we were actively recruiting for this position. And she said, "Hey, I met this person and she's awesome. You need to reach out to her. She's a soccer fan and all that. And she's always wanted to work in sports, but I think she's relationship based and she wants to learn. And she was right. It was one of the best hires ever made. And she didn't have a background in sports really. She was a competitive dancer for a while and competitive in pageants and stuff. So she wanted to win, and she enjoyed that part of it. But she was a relationship builder, so went out and we had to teach her, how to put together partnerships and how to look at things and how to put together a pitch and build the relationships. But the ethics, the background, the work rate, that was all there. And I think that's, to me, more important than the skill set. There are some positions, you can't hire a chief financial officer that has no accounting background, right? Just because they like numbers. But in other certain areas, you can teach somebody and you can bring them along if they have that. But the growth mindset for me is the biggest thing I look for. Are you willing to get better? Are you willing to learn? One of the questions I always ask in an interview, and somebody told me this, I didn't think of it myself, was what's the last thing you taught yourself how to do? And you get some really interesting answers. Like, I taught myself to fly fish, or I taught myself, how to speak a new language. I, picked up Italian because we're going on a big trip to Italy with my family in a year. And that really kind of lets you understand what people are about, what they're passionate about. Then you ask them, another question is, what do you do when you're away from work? And a lot of people say, well, I'm usually always working. And to me, that's a good sign. I think you have to have balance. I get that. But when they say that, it always piques my interest. And then they talk about, I read, I listen to music, I go to concerts, we go on hikes. And that kind of tells you they're active, they're doing things, they're family oriented, So I think it's just, you have to have that feeling, and you have to really kind of trust your gut when you're building that culture. But you have to have some non-negotiables too, that you just will not, how we treat each other and how we treat, our customers, our partners, we're not going to flex on that. We're going to hold true. And I think if you do that, you can usually find the right people to come in and work.
Yeah. I guess kind of on that flip side then, what are some of the, I guess, red flags when you're interviewing someone and you're asking these questions about, what they do outside of work, and you're really getting to know them as a person? What are some of the things that either common trends or, individual ones that have just been like, oh no, that's not the right person. That's not the right fit.
I think in sports, everybody has to have a little bit of independence, right? And everybody, has different relationships outside of work. But I think finding people that are willing to do some things on their own, somebody always asks, my wife is a big cyclist. She loves to ride her bike. I do not like to ride my bike. I prefer to go for walks, right? So that we have that separate piece. And I think finding people that through those conversations, you find out that they're willing to do some things on their own, because oftentimes, you're in the office late or you're going on a sales call by yourself, but there's a ton of time you're together as a team too. So I think the red flags would be, questions that come up about, what are typical hours? Okay, well, there's no typical hours, right? I mean, in sports, and everybody treats that differently in terms of, I've been at clubs where there was no vacation policy. I've been at clubs where it's a very strict, typical corporate vacation policy, right? But it's, you usually kind of sort through it. The red flags, it's a tough one to answer because I think they just kind of hit you when they say it. And what do they ask about first? Are they asking, and what do they not ask? If they don't ask, what's the culture like here? I asked that when I came to USL. I knew a couple of people that worked here, and I said, what's the culture like? I didn't ask about, what the salary was or what the benefits were right away. Obviously, that's important. But it was more about, what's the culture like, and am I going to be happy there? So, and when people don't ask some of those questions, I think for me, it sets off some red flags.
Yeah, definitely. Well, getting into a bit more about, your transition for your career so far. Obviously, we've spoken about being in St. Louis and being kind of in the earlier years of the league. And then you made the move to Chattanooga, which was in a different league. How did being in two different leagues kind of differ from, you'd built this kind of knowledge base of, obviously you mentioned the USL was changing and evolving very, very quickly. Mm-hmm. How did getting into NISA differ from what your last 5 years had been?
Yeah, so that's a tough one. We can not a tough one. We can go in a lot of different ways there. I think the biggest challenges were that, when I came into USL, it was kind of in that first involvement, right? You had, some of the MLS2 teams were coming in. Had new groups like Louisville, Tulsa, Oklahoma City, Sacramento. Some of those were right before us. Some of them were at the same time, Colorado Springs. Um, but, I think during that growth, there was a real level of excitement. Not everything was perfect. Not everything is perfect today. But there was an excitement about where the league was going and, the support that the league offered as well. So even going back to 2014 um, when we launched, St. Louis FC the following year, we jumped on an airplane and went to like 5 different clubs. And we went to clubs that we felt were going to be similar to us, either in the makeup of the city, the club stadium. We went to Sacramento and Oklahoma City because they were new and we wanted, what lessons did they learn? We wanted to ask those questions. We went to Pittsburgh because they were very similar to St. Louis in the sense that they have Major League Baseball, NHL, and at the time, NFL. Obviously, the Rams left St. Louis during the St. Louis FC days. So that support was there. Every trip, we went to Charleston as well. Every trip we went on, open book, sharing, hey, here's what we would change. Here's things you need to be aware of. Those were so valuable. And the league also provided a ton of resources. When I got to Chattanooga, the only support was from the club itself because the club had been around for, 11, 12 years at that time as an amateur club, but a pretty high performing amateur club. The league itself at NISA at the time didn't have any of that supporter structure. Could talk to a couple of clubs, that had been around for a little bit and similar to Chattanooga, but so many of those clubs were brand new and they just didn't have the support or the structure. And some of them weren't really worried about the business model where, in order to fulfill the mission statement of the club in Chattanooga, we had to have a good business model. We had to bring in revenue in order to do the things in the community that the club was founded on. There weren't a lot of clubs in Nice at the time that had a business model. They weren't really trying to move forward. So that was a challenge and that made it difficult. So I relied a lot on, people that I knew, people that I worked with before, to try to make sure that we could stay on track and do things the right way. The other difference was just that, within USL, there's different DNAs at a club. Every club, has different, like Oakland is very different than North Carolina FC. And Detroit is very different than FC Tulsa. But they all have a purpose and they all really, have that, in terms of how they operate. And in NISA, everybody was, pretty similar, I think. I think a few clubs were different in terms of how they went about their business, but I think that made it a challenge early on. But being at the club was great. Loved it. Loved Chattanooga. Loved the experiences. I think probably one of the most difficult challenges was going through a pandemic in that league because I think we didn't get a lot of assistance during that time, and that was a challenge. But we got through it.
Awesome. And then one of the things that I read about is that the fans in both Chattanooga and St. Louis FC loved that you were very accessible to them and the supporter groups as the team's acting GM and vice president. How important to teams in the USL at all levels are the communities and the fans, and how do you guys kind of support them and growing and maintaining their fan bases? And also, if you want to touch back on how you guys did that at St. Louis and Chattanooga as well, that would really be interesting because I know that the fans in Chattanooga are definitely something special.
Yeah, I've been, again, dumb luck, put yourself around the right people, right? So in St. Louis, when we had visited some places, we saw the difference of a stadium full of supporters and a stadium that doesn't have supporters. It's night and day, right? Like my wife and daughter to this day, can talk about, a handful of matches that they went to away from where I was working at the time and just the atmosphere, right? And they talk about it and just it feels different. It's what's different about soccer than any other sport in the US. You go to a basketball game in Europe, it's more like a soccer game in Europe or a soccer game in the US, right? As opposed to how it is here. And hockey's the same way. That supporter culture means the world, I think, to our sport. It means the world to me personally. So back in St. Louis, word was starting to sneak out that a USL team was coming and that St. Louis Scott Gallagher might be involved with it. So two of the leaders of the supporters group there, the St. Louigans, Brad and Mitch, reached out to us via Twitter and DM'd one of the executives at the club. And so they passed on my phone number And I said, hey, let's meet for a beer. So we sat down at ITAP, International Tap House in Soulard. I'll never forget it. And we sat there, and the first thing I told them was, hey, look, we're going to build this club the right way. We're going to build it with a supporter culture. I know you guys are worried that we're a youth soccer club, and when you think of a youth soccer club, you think of mom and dads that are high strung and don't want, fun, what you guys bring. I'm telling you, we're going to build this around you. And we did. The second thing I told them was we are going to move. When there was a team previously that played in that stadium, they were at this end. And we said, we're going to move you over here. And here's why. It's right next to the scoreboard, the video board. So when people are looking there at replays or looking at this at the time left in the game, we want them to automatically focus on you guys. You also be in the camera shot. We didn't have stands behind the goals, so that was out. And they looked at me like I was crazy, and probably said a few choice words under their breath. But I think what it showed them was that we valued them, but we were also going to be straight with them and said, hey, here's what we're doing and here's why. And we think this is going to help you grow. And so we had a ton of meetings like that. I took them on a bus trip to Indy 11 so they could go meet with the Brickyard Battalion and their supporters group. And I could meet with Peter Wilt, who's somebody that I hold in high regard, who's done a lot for me personally and through my career, somebody I still talk to all the time, just even on personal stuff to catch up. But we went over there so they could see, what does a tailgate look like? How do you do your tifos? How do you do drums? Do you store stuff at the stadium? All those things that people don't think about when they turn on a game and see, a great supporters group in stadiums, throughout the U.S. They don't think about all those things. So I still talk to those two guys to today. We spent a lot of time together. We always didn't agree, but we were always available and always thought out their opinion on things. They always gave us their opinion as well. But that level of trust really came into it. And that also started with the board and Pat Barry, as well as the president, and Steve Petcher. We all got involved with them, and they were independent. They did their own thing. They had their own merch. There were times they weren't happy with our decisions, but we could always just talk about it. And it made that atmosphere what it is. Shift that. I go to Chattanooga, right? And here's a guy coming from a USL club, to this independent, but they were NPSL at the time, shifting to NISA, and they were weary. The first time I showed up at before that night, they announced me in the morning, press conference, whatever, and we went to the brewery to go do a meet and greet afterwards. And this one guy grilled me with 6 or 7 questions. Why would you leave USL? Why are you doing this? Well, it was just whoa, But they had also done their homework. They had reached out to the Lewigans and asked them, can we trust this guy? And I think they did. And I think it worked out really well. But same type of things, a ton of beers, a ton of conversations, a lot of text messages, some tough conversations, about, hey, we're going to make a change, or this player is not going to come back, giving them a heads up so they can prepare themselves, their supporters, their social media. But just, giving them an opportunity to be heard, but giving them an opportunity to be important, and then also helping elevate what they do. The Lewigans and the Chattanooga both, as well as a ton of our supporters groups, within USL, do a lot in their communities. So as a club side, trying to help, elevate that, give them more of a platform to do some of the things they do. And you see that with a lot of the supporter groups. So I'm a big believer in supporter culture. It makes or breaks our environments. It's great to see so many of our clubs in USL lean into it. And those relationships, like I said, are going to have great times, are going to have tough times, but you just, you're honest, you're transparent, you communicate, and you're supportive of each other and the investment that they're making into the community, into the club, and into people. So it's one of the first things I do when I go visit a stadium. And I went to Rhode Island, their home opener. First thing I did was I heard them marching in. So I just removed myself from the conversation I was in the VIP tent, which is important, right? But I want to go out and see what these guys were going to bring. And they were great. So anytime I go to a stadium, I always try to, swing by, sneak by, buy them a beer if I can, hear what they have to say, and just have some conversations. But it's really, really important, I feel, for the growth of the sport in our country.
Yeah. And one of the things that you just mentioned right at the end there is Rhode Island, one of the expansion teams in the USL Championship most recently. And also, since the USL encompasses all three levels, plus the women's league, a lot of teams are coming into existence now, especially within the last few years. How does the league office help teams do that and then find further success?
Yeah. So I told the story about in St. Louis, we went and visited all the clubs, right? And we got some information about here's some best practices, talk to these clubs, blah, 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 blah. It was great. But what we do today is 10x that. It's crazy. We have a full onboarding team that's well staffed. Depending on when a club is coming in, they will meet with them weekly, monthly, quarterly, depending on when they're coming in, if they're a year away, 18 months away, whatever it is. And Justin Rechtenwald leads that program for us. And it's amazing the amount of resources, benchmarks that we can provide them and say, hey, you're 18 months away from your first kick. Here's where other clubs have been in terms of ticket deposits, merch sales, corporate partners. So they can benchmark and see, are they ahead? Are they behind? And then helping them through that whole process. And then once they're in, they shift into our club performance group and club services. And there's a whole different department that's part of onboarding, but it's not their main focus. Their main focus is once a club starts, how are they helping them? Sometimes that's a monthly phone call where clubs just go over best practices. Sometimes it's helping them put together pitch decks for partnerships, for corporate partnerships. We have a VP of consumer products. She'll meet with them to go over, hey, here's your margins, how your margins doing. Here's some new vendors that we have. One of the things when she came in and started, Sarah, she realized that most of our clubs had very little in infant and toddler, merch gear. And if you think about sports, right? I mean, I know who I support and who I follow. Started following them when I was young. So if a young kid comes to a game with mom or dad or their uncle or whatever, and they have merch, I mean, that's something that lives with them and it scales and forever, and they become, a lifelong supporter of that club. So we're constantly tweaking and making changes and trying to make sure that we're offering a lot of services for the clubs. And they can pick up a phone and call anytime. And we put a lot of resources, and that's a credit to the USL leadership, as they saw that, look, if we're going to support these clubs and have them be successful, we got to put time and resources into them. So we do a ton of that. There's a lot of good work happening that nobody public facing sees, right? You don't see the work that those groups are doing, but they're spending a lot of time with our clubs, helping them look at all different areas of revenue and, just helping them manage and try to drive their businesses forward.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing that information that, to your point, the general public don't see, and that's a big part of this podcast, is trying to pull back that curtain a bit from, and even to your point about the supporter group, you see them at the stadium, you see them on TV, and you just see them, you see the end product, but you don't see everything that's gotten them to that point. And on the note of expansion teams and new teams coming in, I think, again, from the outside perspective, for a lot of people, when it comes to getting a team into a league, people just think, oh, you just need X amount of dollars and you're in. But obviously, there's a lot more complexity to it than just that. So can you talk us through kind of when there's proposals from expansion groups that want to bring a team to a certain area, what kind of interview process looks like, what kind of criteria you're looking for to give it the green light, and kind of, I don't know if it's data points or maybe sometimes it's more a bit of a feeling and getting out there and seeing the area. But what does that look like when there's proposals and bids and you have to actually select, a new expansion team?
Yeah, similar to onboarding in the club performance group, we have a whole department, on expansion, and they're looking at a lot of different things. So it's not just one thing. It definitely isn't just a feeling. I think it comes down to, first and foremost, the community. Is the community wanting, prepared? Is the right mix of things there in the community, to drive a club forward and to make the club part of the community? So, is the community wanting that? Then the next thing goes into it is ownership, right? You have to have the proper ownership. And, that looks different today than it looked, 5-10 years ago, in terms of the investment that's needed, the type of ownership groups that come in, what is their driver? What is their motivation? For majority of them, it's community focused, right? Community based. They want to bring something to that community that makes it a better place to live, work, and play. And then, the last piece is the stadium piece. Where are people going to spend a good number of their Saturdays? What's the stadium situation like? Is it a temporary stadium to get them into, a future stadium? Is there a stadium that they're going to retrofit to make work for their project? So there's a lot of little things that go into it. And those happen through conversations, through presentations, through running the numbers, looking at, who are they competing against? I often said in Chattanooga, we didn't compete against the other sports teams in town. Baseball, soccer, the university. We were competing with the river, with the mountains, with the lakes. People had a lot of choices to do on Saturday night. Some places it might be music festivals or other things that they compete with, or the beach. That people commit or compete with. So we have to look at all those factors and then kind of put them all together and see if this is something that we want to move forward with as a league and with those groups. The good news is there's a lot of communities that are hungry for the sport to move forward in their community, and we're out there working hard with many of them to see if it's something that might come together.
Awesome. And on that community piece, is there any kind of quantifiable data points that you're looking at in terms of, I don't know if it's I know like youth participation in the sport is a massive driver and getting that immediate interest for a new club. David and I were part of Bay Cities for that very, very short stint of a season that there was, and obviously club failed, so maybe we're doing the wrong things. But we knew a big part was getting the youth clubs out there and getting the kids to get into it and buy into it, and therefore the parents come with them. But on that point of community and seeing, okay, this community is looking for a team, like how can you quantify that interest and know that it really gets the green light?
I think you have to look at how other similar organizations are supported. And again, that could be a music festival, right? That's, could be that. It could be another sports team, whether it's minor league baseball or hockey or the NBA, how are they supported? Also, you got to look at, the makeup of the community. A lot of people that come, to soccer matches are going to fit in those different age categories, right? 10 years ago it was millennials. Now it's shifted down and so forth. So you have to look and see who's there. Do they have enough to do? Do businesses have enough things to retain employees, right? And especially coming out of COVID and a lot of people working remotely, and then people coming back into the workforce. A lot of those groups are looking for opportunities to get their workforce together. Are there enough things for them to feel a part of it? And companies want to feel a part of the community. And a great way to do that is through sports and through being a part of something. So you have to look at all those different things. There's the expansion group definitely has data points of those, if they're looking at. The youth soccer one is interesting because it's important. No question about it. All of our clubs have a good amount of support that comes from youth soccer players, and their families. But you can't just rely only on that, because those are busy, active people that have games all day Saturday, sometimes all day Sunday, or even if they only have one game on Saturday, they may have been at the practice field Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. So those families are busy. So you can't just rely on them. That was one of the first things that we learned in St. Louis when we were going on our trips was like, look, if you're just going to rely on the youth club to come and support this thing, don't do it because it'll fail. You have to go find, at the time, millennials, right? You got to go find those people looking for something to do. You got to go find those people that are looking to go out and belong to something and try to, be involved. So yeah, there's all kinds of data points that we look at, and then you kind of, again, mix all those together, make sure that there's that want and that desire, but that want and desire comes in so many different ways.
Naturally, one of the things that's going on tonight, and tonight's just the first of 2 days of a really special tournament to U.S. soccer. But specifically, the Open Cup, it pits basically members of all of USL's leagues along with a bunch of other amateur teams against each other. And on top of that, it gives them the chances to compete authentically with MLS teams as well. How important do you think the Open Cup is to the growth of the sport? And then also just kind of a fun one. what are your favorite storylines or Cinderella stories that are developing this year so far?
Yeah, absolutely. Open Cup means a lot to me. We had a great run in St. Louis, had a good run in Chattanooga. Where we got the opportunity to play MLS clubs both times, and even leading up to some of those runs, going and playing some amateur teams. When you're the pro team, you're going into that sometimes smaller community, smaller stadium. You just have a sense, you have an obligation. I think you feel like we're obligated to put our best foot forward, to play hard, to sign autographs after the game, even though maybe we got to bus 6 hours home or whatever it is. You feel an obligation to help grow the sport. I've also been on the amateur side where you're trying to knock off that pro team. So I've seen both sides of it, and I love it. I absolutely love it. I think it's important for the growth of the sport in our country. I think it connects small cities, bigger cities, emerging cities. If we just rely on the current establishment of League X and League Y and League Z to just grow the sport, I think we're fooling ourselves. I think we need to connect the big cities, the medium size, like I said, all those things. And soccer is a great way to do it. And this competition is the best way to do it. I think everybody can look at it differently. We have clubs in USL that look at it differently. They last year, San Antonio in their first match rolled out a very, very young lineup because they felt that was important for their club. They won the game, they moved on. MLS clubs traditionally have viewed it differently. Some, it means everything to them, some not as much. And so I think that's okay. And I think that's okay. But I do think it is the closest thing that we have, to promotion relegation in our country, that chance for, David versus Goliath, all those analogies you want to use. But more importantly to me, I think it connects the sport across all different communities. In terms of Cinderella stories, what Vermont Green did with their crowds and, just how they put that team together was pretty neat. Des Moines went a completely different way, right? They kind of put a TST team together, with some guys because their summer team is going to be relied upon with college players, and they couldn't get all those guys because of the college rules and stuff. The NPSL club out of San Francisco, El Farolito, that plays Oakland Roots, is interesting. I think Lubbock Matadors, Michael Hitchcock does a great job with his clubs. Going to play New Mexico, I think, is another great story. So I think it's full of them. And I think it's, there's going to be more that'll come out of this round that will be, driving some things forward. You look at what Union Omaha did a couple of years ago. These are things that I think drive the sport forward, give us stories to talk about. So I don't think we've seen all the storylines this year. There'll be a few more that will come out of it.
Yeah, awesome. And I think David is going to that Roots and El Farolito game tonight.
Oh.
So that'll be fun. But another big thing, kind of coming back to USL, that's changed this year, and a bit of a monumental change, I'd say, is the deal with CBS and actually getting now, I think it's 100 games through the 2027 season, each season aired on TV, which is massive. It's a massive deal, and in terms of propelling USL forward, and I'd say getting it closer and closer to kind of fighting for attention with the MLS. Again, going back to the idea of pulling back the curtain on things, and again, people see the headlines, they read the article, but they don't know anything about how it got to that point. Can you pull back the curtain a bit on kind of how a massive deal like that comes from an idea or initial conversations and actually being fruition and in place, and now games are on CBS?
So the process took about just under a year, in terms of putting it together. And again, it's not something I was involved with day to day, but I was brought along for the ride with it. But it went back to, we talked to a lot of different potential partners, a lot of different networks and, broadcasts and streamers and everything. We talked to everybody. And really through that process, I think what we found out was we wanted a couple of things. One, we wanted to protect local TV for our clubs. We wanted our clubs to be able to put games on local TV, home or away, both, some, a mixture, whatever works in their market, in their community. And so that was a big one. The second thing we wanted was more relevance. We wanted a chance to become more relevant in the landscape. And, but most importantly, we really wanted a partner. We wanted somebody that was going to promote us, help us move forward, help our clubs, help us tell our story, which I think CBS did a tremendous job at the Louisville Indy game. I think they told the USL story very, very well. The crowd told the story, the players told the story. So together it takes everybody. So those are kind of the three main things that we wanted to get. And CBS was the one that fit that. They really wanted to help us. And if you look at what they're doing through the Golasso Network, the amount of opportunities we're getting to tell stories on there, to do interviews, some of our emerging players, emerging coaches, some of the history of our clubs, it's tremendous. So that's a big, big part of it. But the pressure's on to produce, in terms of the quality in the play, what the stadium looks like. Because I think some of the best comments we got about the April 6th match were no matter you turn that match on and you didn't know it was in Louisville, Kentucky, you could have easily thought that game was in Belgium, Holland, Germany, England, wherever, because of the quality of the broadcast, the level of engagement in the stadium, and then the quality of play. Now, I don't think anybody turned that match on and thought it was an EPL match. No disrespect to Louisville or Indy, but you could flip that on and wonder, okay, this is somewhere in the EFL, right? Oh, no, it's in Louisville, Kentucky. Oh, crap. That's crazy. So really was a lot of work behind the scenes to find that right partner. We're excited to be with ESPN as well, because they're another good partner for us, and they provide that platform for a number of our matches. But we really wanted to be, really widely available. And it was important to us that, if somebody doesn't have, Peacock, Amazon, ESPN Plus, all the, name them all, right? CBS, Paramount Plus, if they don't have that and they live in San Antonio and they want to watch their team, they can flip on their TV and watch it, on local TV. And that was a big driver for us.
Obviously, the Apple deal has pushed the MLS forward, and now CBS is pushing USL forward. So it's definitely a really exciting time to get more eyes on the sport and at that level. Was the Louisville and Indy game strategically chosen to be the first game, given you mentioned how attractive it was looked on the screen? Was that in particularly chosen?
I'd be lying if I said it wasn't, because yes, it was. I think, but I think it was a statement. It was a statement too of, where clubs have gone, where they've been, where they're going, and the same thing for the league. Louisville started in a baseball stadium, and then they made the investment and did a lot of work. John Neese and the ownership group there, and they got that stadium, and now they've kind of rebuilt this whole area of Louisville that's really coming up. Indy, is doing the same thing. They're going to build what's going to become the crown jewel of USL. And Rhode Island, we mentioned, and you've seen all the other pieces about stadiums, and so stadiums are important. So I think it was important for us to show, yes, we have some teams that aren't playing in what they would want from a desirable stadium, but there is a path. There is a way for that to move forward. It's important to support those clubs along the way to make sure that they can get there. And it's important for those clubs to work towards, a different solution if they're not pleased with the one they have. But it was important for us to show the history of those two clubs and kind of how they've gotten there. At the same time, that showed the history of our league, in terms of the level of players that were coming in, the level of coaches. You had a former MLS coach in Sean McCauley, coach in Indy. You had Danny Cruz, former MLS player, and was an assistant coach, and then was an assistant coach in Louisville, and he progressed. So there's a lot of different ways to and I'm one of those, right? In terms of how to grow this as a career or a passion in this sport. There's no straight line. There's no just one way to do it. And I think we showed that. And I think that's a big part of USL, where we've been and really more importantly, where we're going with some things. So there was some strategy behind that one for sure. Rivalry match doesn't hurt. That game had 8 goals, I think, had a couple yellow cards, a couple scuffles, a couple balls off the post. I mean, it was almost like pro wrestling. It's like we wrote the script, right? It had everything you would want in it. And I think that was a big positive for us.
And now, we've done a lot of kind of looking backwards. But now I want to get into just quickly looking ahead. And obviously we mentioned terms of US soccer as a whole, we mentioned the Apple deal, CBS deal, and then there's of course everything coming up in the next, half a decade of tournaments coming, both on the men's side and then hopefully the women's bid as well. And obviously Messi and the trickle down effect that has across all leagues. Obviously it's a big boost for the MLS, but I think it definitely helps every league below it, right down to the youth level of people seeing Messi and wanting to play the sport. What do you think the next? Of course, I'm sure there's 5-year, 10-year, 3-year plans in place, but what do you kind of see for USL as well as US soccer kind of evolving into over the next 10 years as this growth most likely 99.9% sure happens?
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head. It's an important time frame for us, right? And so we need to capture this. We need to capture, but we also need to grow. Because if you look at what the 94 World Cup did and then the 99 Women's World Cup, and what it did for our country is it really pushed it forward in so many different ways. So how are we going to grow out of this? We just can't make soccer fans more happy over the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years during this. We have to get more people excited about soccer. And I think that's a big challenge, because there's so many sports, there's so many things to do in this country. There's so many ways to spend your time. So we have to learn, from some of the ways that we've grown in the past, creating great atmospheres, creating great opportunities to belong and be a part of something. So the USL is doing that through our stadium projects. Our clubs are investing, finding new ways to get involved in the community. A number of our clubs have very strong foundations now that are being very active. If you look at the NFL and the NBA and the NHL and Major League Baseball, they do so much in their communities, right? And so much of giving back. And think of the Thanksgiving game in Dallas and the players the night before, serving dinner to, people, in a homeless shelter or wherever, giving back in so many ways. And so we now have clubs that are doing the same at a smaller scale, but they're still giving back to their communities. So we got to grow. We got to get more people excited about the sport. And really utilize this time frame. And again, USL is doing that through growing, through bringing the sport to more communities, through more involvement in the communities we're already in, and through building, some of these stadiums. And I think the other thing is we have to continue to show a pathway for the American player. And I think that's going to be a challenge for all of us. It's definitely been a challenge, for MLS. It's definitely been a challenge for us. I think we're doing some great things that way. I think we're creating some pathways and some opportunities for young players because this next 5, 6, 7 years of events in our country is going to flip a light switch for a kid. Whether he turns on a game, he goes to a big party in Times Square to watch the game up on the board, or he goes to a match. Something's that's going to flip a switch for a kid. And how do we provide an opportunity for that kid to grow and develop and chase his or her dreams and move forward? So it's a lot of work, and it's going to be all levels are going to have to be involved. I hope U.S. Soccer can do that. I hope they can unite all the various levels, the youth, the grassroots, the elite, the amateur, the recreational, the pro. I hope they can get us all together in the same page to drive the sport forward here in the next decade. Because we're going to need it. We're going to need to keep growing fans and keep, creating new ones.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I mean, to your point, the next 5, 7 years of kind of capturing all of that interest that will come, and then the legacy after that of harnessing that to actually keep that excitement, but kind of bolster it up even more will be really exciting. I think it has to be the most exciting decade of soccer for the country. I know we're getting close to time, but we do always end with a few kind of quicker fire questions with short responses and just roll it off the tongue. So first one for you is, what is your favorite USL Championship rivalry?
It's hard to argue Louisville and Indy right now. I think that's one. Pittsburgh and Tampa is a sneaky one. They do not like each other. So I think those both be pretty good ones.
And then, what is the one thing you miss the most about working on the club level?
Interaction with players, relationships with players. So one of the things I really try to do when I go to stadiums is if there's a player that I've known from my past, try to see him and spend some time with him, and then trying to build relationships with guys that I don't know. But that would be the one thing.
Nice, nice. And then this can be a one-word answer, or you can elaborate if you'd like. But are you in favor of the idea of promotion relegation for the country?
For the country, I think it makes. I'm in favor of it in general, for sure. I think, yeah. For speaking specifically for USL, we've had those discussions. There's a lot to still discuss and a lot to still figure out. But it's hard not to look overseas and be, engaged right now in championship. What's happening at the top, what's happening at the bottom. But I think it's I think it could move our sport more so than anything else that we could ever do.
And then the last one, and this can be personally or professionally, what is the one thing you're most looking forward to in the remainder of 2024?
I think, from the league side of things, really seeing where some of these title races kind of go. If you look at last year, the Eastern ended up with Charleston and Louisville in the final, and the West was Phoenix and Sacramento, and they got there different ways. So I really want to see in year two, now that I know what's going on in the league, kind of see how that evolves. I think personally is to see some of the players that I know, how they take the next step forward, or just as important, how they start to prepare for life after playing. A couple of guys I know are a little bit older, and they've told me, look, playing days are coming to an end. I'm excited about what's next, and I'm really excited to see. I think the game is going to grow when we have more and more people that have played, been involved, stay in it. They could stay in it as a referee. They could stay in it as a season ticket holder. They could stay in it as a coach, as a front office person. But I think the more people that have, played this game at high levels, stay involved in it, the more the game's going to grow. So I'm excited about that.
Thank you again so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Best of luck to you guys.
Thanks for watching this episode of Off the Pitch. Don't forget to drop a follow or subscribe on the podcast platform you're listening from. That helps us bring stories like these to your ears each and every week. And if you have a minute, leave a review as well, as that helps us grow the Off the Pitch community and bring even more exciting guests on. See you in the next one.